Foldables are interesting beasts, and it's only in the last couple of years that they've become somewhat viable for everyday use. You've got the Flip, which is a modern day take on the flip phones of old, and then you have the Fold, which is a little bit more tricky, not least because they're also so much more expensive. The Fold 4 has been out for a number of months now, but is it worth picking up a Fold 3 instead, and for a much cheaper price? And a big shout out, by the way, to Mazillion for loaning me the phone for a couple of months. Really appreciate it. You can check them out at the link down below. One of the best places to buy a second-hand foldable, by the way, you get a 2-year guarantee, which is something you definitely want. We should talk about specs first, and then we'll get on to my experience and why you might want to buy a Fold in the first place. We've got a Snapdragon 888 packed in along with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, so we're going to have absolutely no issues long term in terms of specs. We've got a triple cam arrangement on the rear consisting of 3 12-megapixel sensors. Probably the weakest aspect of the device, but then it's unlikely that you are buying a Fold for the camera experience. There's a 10-megapixel camera on the front, and on the inside screen, we have a 4-megapixel under-display camera. It's not actually as impressive as it sounds, in the picture quality at least, but it is a little bit more obscured, so you don't really see it standing out quite as much whilst you're using the device. We do have water resistance, but there's no dust proofing with an IPX8 rating. Of course, it is the screen on the inside that is the most interesting part of this phone, and probably the main reason why you would want to buy it. So it's a 7.6-inch 2K 120Hz HDR OLED folding display. Obviously it's a folding display. It looks gorgeous. It looks great. The outer screen's a little bit more mixed. So it's a 25:9 1080p 120Hz OLED, which means it's really, really narrow. And as somebody who's a fan of Xperia phones, I know what narrow screens are like. This is crazy narrow. This is all rounded off with a 4400 mAh battery and 25-watt charging, which really isn't fast enough at all, but they've stuck with it even on the Fold 4. Let's sigh. Oh yeah, and you've got to buy a charging brick too. So overall, we've got solid specs. There's not really anything to worry about long term. On the note of it being solid, I have to say the build is really, really good. There are questions as to the durability of that inside screen, but the rest of the hardware feels like it's built like a tank, basically. It's fantastic. First up, I'm going to make this initial statement. This is not a great phone to have as your only device. For me, I would say it's more of a secondary handset, and I'm going to give you the reasons right now. So first up, that outer screen. It's far too narrow. It's far too narrow. It is very difficult to type on, and it just makes things a little bit of a chore. And as I say, I'm somebody who's used to using a Sony Xperia, 21:9 screens, some of the narrowest screens out there that are in actual use, regular use in normal phones. And I love the narrow display, but this is too narrow. This forces you to use that inner screen. And you know, that's the main reason you bought it, and that's great. But you don't want to be using that all the time. It's much more convenient to be able to use the outer display. And then using that inner screen has its own issues. So for instance, if you want to use the phone to multitask, the display is sort of split up into the dimensions that are the same as the outer display. So if you literally go into split screen, each side of the screen is split for a separate app, then both of those apps are still running in the same aspect ratio as it would be on the outer screen. So you've got the same issue. I mean, of course, you can rotate the phone to use it in the wider format, but then you're gonna, in that format, you're then going to lose a bit of that vertical space in the app, and then you've also got that crease then running across the screen as opposed to vertically, which means your thumbs are going to be running over it a lot more, and it becomes a lot more noticeable in that respect. It's not a major problem, but it's not the best. So you also have as well, when it comes to some games and some apps, you've got the scaling issues. So for instance, Instagram, and I'm going to show you this on the Fold 4, which I now have. Yes, I have the Fold 4, more on that coming soon. And this is how it appears. So that's how Instagram appears on the Fold. That's the same on the Fold 3. So it doesn't scale properly. Some apps aren't designed to make use of this space yet. And then you've got things like Pokemon Go, when you play in some games, the UI elements don't fit. And that is a bit of a problem when you're trying to get to certain parts of the game. You can work around this by, of course, splitting the screen. You can have Twitter running on one side, you can have Pokemon Go running on the other side, and then Pokemon Go is running at an aspect ratio that it can cope with. But then the problem is, why would you not just play Pokemon Go on the outer screen? You kind of want to use that full screen, right? So it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. And that becomes a little bit frustrating. You just sort of think, well, why do I even have this? What's the point? And then there's the cameras on the Fold 3. Now, it's an expensive phone, and I would imagine most people buying a very expensive phone, be it foldable or not, would expect the cameras to be good. Not the best. I wouldn't expect them to be the best. You know, you've got you need a lot of space in a phone for cameras. So having the best cameras, the biggest cameras, will probably make the Fold very, very thick in places. And it's a big engineering task. But the ones on the Fold 3 just aren't acceptable. So what we basically have is something that is mid-range at best. You would probably compare them to the output from, say, the Samsung A series, like the A33 and the A53. You get really saturated colors. And it's nothing like the quality that you would get from something like an S22. And actually the Fold 4 has the upgraded sensors from the S22 range. Video quality is still good though, so that's one positive. It is unlikely that you're going to want to use the cameras on the phone that much, because you probably won't be that happy with the output. But I guess there's always the option to edit the photos afterwards if you just wanted to change the colours. Now, on to more positive notes. So, even with these issues, I absolutely loved using the Fold 3 as a secondary device whilst at home. So, media consumption with that inner screen, the fantastic speakers, it was just a great experience. I really enjoyed using it. I watched a lot of YouTube on it, as well as using it for Twitter, which for Twitter in particular made it feel like an almost different experience, because when you were looking through like photos and videos, it looked really nice, and you see details in there that you just don't see normally on a smaller phone. Typing with both hands in the split keyboard layout was really cool, really good, and the haptics are very nice and on point. Not the strongest, but I don't like strong haptics because I sometimes find that they're a bit too noisy, and I just think the haptics on the Fold are perfect for me. Like I say, I immediately went to this phone for lounging around the house and consuming any media. That was my thing. It is the perfect consumption phone, but it's a bit expensive for that. And this sort of begs the question: in that case, if it's just going to be used for consumption at home for that bigger screen, why would you not just buy a tablet? Why? You can get a Tab S8 for cheaper, and it'll give you all the benefits of a tablet, and then just have a normal slab phone. You know, there's more to think about with it than you realize. In summary, though, this is not something that I would recommend as your only phone. If you want something like this to use on the daily, I would recommend getting the Fold 4, which, as I've already said, I have just done. And it does fix a lot of the issues with the Fold 3. So that really narrow outer display, still narrow, but a lot better. And the camera stuff has been fixed. So if you really want to get something to use on the daily, I would probably wait for the Fold 4 to drop in price, and it is already coming down pretty rapidly, as most Samsung phones do. And it will be a lot better for multitasking purposes. If you're somebody who wants to use the phone in decks, you know, with an extra display and hook up mouse and keyboard, do your video editing on there, rendering videos, that sort of stuff. The Fold 4 is going to handle it better than the Fold 3 as well. The Fold 3 is still no slouch. Snapdragon 888 is still very powerful. And it's a hell of a lot better than the Exynos chips in the S range and down. But it does get very toasty. The 8 Plus Gen 1 is a bit of a peach. One of the best chips you can get at the moment. And it'll be absolutely solid for that. The whole purpose of a Fold is being able to use that larger inner screen as a sort of tablet and being able to have conversations on Twitter, watch a YouTube video, whilst also scripting a video at the same time is kind of next level. Not gonna lie. So good. So good. At least it would be on the Fold 3 if you had the better aspect ratio to make better use of those screens. And you can take this further by hooking your Fold up to a monitor, use a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, various other things in DeX mode, and have it as a real productivity powerhouse. I mean, a Fold can really do all that if you use it in the right way. And unfortunately, I didn't get to try any of this because I don't have the accessories on hand to really make use of that. And again, adding something like the S Pen, which the Fold 3 has functionality for, the first two iterations of the Fold didn't have that. So you can get the S Pen and make even better use of that inner screen if you wish. In summary, this is not a phone that I would recommend as your only phone. And if you want something like this to use on the daily, I would recommend getting the Foldy 4. I would. Which, of course, I have just picked up. I've shown you already. And it does fix a lot of the issues. The screen, the cameras, the SoC is much better as well. It improves in all the right areas. So if you want something for the daily, the Fold 4 is the one to go for. The Fold 3 is a tricky one because it doesn't quite do everything well. But if you wanted a secondary device just to try a foldable, or if you really wanted something that's a tablet but not as big as some of the other tablets on the market, then, you know, give it a go. They're running at reasonable prices these days, so there is that, but I still think just getting a tablet would be the better way to go. But by the time you've bought a tablet and then bought a phone that's got good cameras, you're pretty much in Fold 4 territory, so you could give it a go and see what you think. The Fold 3, however, yeah, I think it just missed the mark. It just missed the mark. It didn't quite live up to the expectation. For those of you that are thinking that you're going to use it for multitasking mostly anyway, fair enough. For me, it's just that it doesn't do the basics, and that makes it a difficult product to recommend to people generally. It's very frustrating in that respect. As I said, Fold 4 fixes a lot of issues. I have plenty of content coming on this in the coming weeks. So if you did find the video useful at all, I would appreciate you subscribing to the channel, maybe liking the video, share it. Sharing is very important. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you own a foldable already. Have you used the Fold 3? What did you think to it? Or did you wait and get a Fold 4? Are you looking to buy for the first time? And what do you think that a foldable will allow you to do better than a regular phone? Stay grounded. I'll see you on the next one.